Welcome, welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the most challenging soft skills required to navigate today's leadership complexities and tomorrow's unknowns. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu, and my new Millennials Workbook for Navigating Workplace Politics is coming out on December 3rd. So, season 6 is focusing on developing proactive strategies for positive, honest power and politics and influence, And today is a very interesting way to think about this, and that I bet you've never, ever considered. So we often talk about boundary setting and leading with authenticity and integrity as ways to be proactive in creating healthier work cultures. But what is the deeper reason behind this? And how can we apply the intersection of trauma-informed practices, leadership, and organizational health to ultimately shape a more human-centered world? In this episode, our guest, Laura Phoenix, will help us explore this. Laura Phoenix is the founder of Warrior Pose Yoga and Healing, based in Durham, North Carolina. She has helped thousands of people of all shapes, races, and genders discover new ways of feeling better, safer, and more able to grow alongside the trauma that they carry. Laura is a somatic experiencing practitioner, SEP, certified yoga teacher, and a healing professional. In addition to her deep professional experience, Laura is also an abuse and trauma survivor who trusts in healing yoga and body work to guide herself forward. She describes herself as a cis, queer, white, able-bodied, neurodivergent human honored to hold space and learn from the diverse perspectives of the folks that she serves. Beyond healing work, Laura can also be found running early in the morning, earlier than I could possibly imagine, just to walk, planting in her garden, which I've tried and I've got a brown thumb, and enjoying game nights, which I can't do because I'm too competitive. So she's a way better person than me. So Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. As I lose my crap over here. A better person because I game nights. That's a new one on me.
Well, let's talk about your affinity for game nights. What does an ideal game night look like for you, and what are your favorite types of games?
So, I actually started playing games and doing game nights because of my own perceived inability to fun. And I was like, how do people fun? I guess they play games. So that is how I started doing it. I am never particularly big on the strategy games where I have to think a lot about how to create some imaginary world where I have to do some complicated thing, because that's just not that fun. I'm a little bit bigger on the kind of getting to know you games. I love the only game I actually own is Esther Perel's game. And I've also recently really enjoyed Queer Agenda.
Those sound good. Yeah, I do appreciate the get to know you connection games for sure. In fact, right here, for a long time, I was using this Delve deck, which you just basically pull a card, ask each other, here's one, what product do you miss that is no longer being sold? That was the first card out.
You remember the pens from the 90s?
Oh, the pens from the 90s? The ones with the different colors that you push
in? It felt very, very cool to have it. It was like, oh, I can make it red, I can make it pink, I can make it black.
Those were pretty awesome. I agree.
It's not really high tech anymore.
Yeah. My favorite product that's no longer around, and it was around for a blip. It was called Coke Black, and it was coffee and Coca-Cola.
What?
It was so good. And nobody liked it, but apparently me, because they removed it from the shelves very quickly.
Oh, so sad. How tragic. You have to make your own now.
All right. Well, I feel better now. We just had our own game night for 5 seconds.
Right.
All right. So Laura and I, we're comfortable with each other because we've already known each other. Okay, let's just sort of establish that. We met through a local women's entrepreneurship community. Unfortunately, it no longer exists, but we ended up having lunch together about a month ago to reconnect. And as I always know, when I talk to Laura, we're going to go deep. So we did go exceptionally deep into a good conversation, which, you know, was of course very enjoyable for an introvert to have like an actual real deep conversation. So thank you, Laura. And when we got into it, we started talking about like the intersection of our interests. And that's how like we started talking about her trauma informed yoga. That's my label. She might call it differently. That's kind of my label on it. Somatic healing work. And how that connects with the experiences of leaders who hold marginalized identities and have experienced trauma. Those are the sort of like connections that we made in terms of our own interests and generational trauma, which she's sort of interested in. And how many of us might not know that we might be carrying trauma around and that our body may be telling us or even screaming at us that something is off, but we don't often pay attention, especially people who are hyperachievers. They're not going to pay attention as closely. And that's a lot of the people who listen to this, right? They're not going to pay as close attention. And sometimes we've done such a great job of disconnecting our feelings from our body. And so Laura and I are going to be exploring, what does this have to do with leadership and organizational health? She's going to convince you everything. Right?
Everything.
So everything. So let's start with the basics. Many of our listeners are kind of business types, heady types, overachieving types like academics, researchers, STEM and tech. So when we use words like somatic and healing, they might feel like skeptical. They might be like, oh, this is so frou-frou or woo or whatever. So let's just start with like definitions, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you define healing work, somatic work, and yoga in a way that connects these dots?
Sure. So somatic basically just means of the body, derives from Greek. Don't need to necessarily get into it, but that whole umbrella covers a lot of ground, including the two modalities that I work with, EMDR, which I do not work with, and a bunch of other stuff that we don't necessarily need to get into for these purposes. What I think is one of the best dots to connect, I suppose, is if you think in terms of how your brain functions, your brain and your nervous systems, and what parts work the fastest. Your amygdala, which is like hidden in the middle of the brain and is the part that's responsible, to slightly oversimplify, for it's responsible for threat response, it's responsible for emotional valence, and it's responsible for survival. That's the part that's fastest, that like fires first, so to speak. And if that part has been hijacked by a survival response, whether it's literally happening in the moment you're being chased by a bear, or whether you've got unresolved trauma, you had a difficult childhood, you are holding a marginalized identity in a world that doesn't see you as equal, or other various reasons. If that part of your brain is on fire, so to speak, you're going to have a harder time doing your best complex thinking. You might be able to bang it out. You might be able to be productive and like make things happen, but you're not at your best, and it's burning resources physiologically at a much higher rate than you would if you were able to regulate easier. Is kind of
Yeah.
my basic bottom line for like why we work somatically. Like we're working closer to those possibly on fire brain parts than when we engage in cognitive work, which has its place too. I'm not saying it's bad or wrong or not helpful. I'm just pointing out that especially for the earliest and deepest traumas, engaging closer to what's actually lighting up, so to speak, can have profound impact.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, let's think about this, right? If you're in a leadership position and someone calls you out on causing harm or hurting somebody's feelings or doing wrong, whatever that is, our first response is that amygdala protection response, right? We get defensive, we get anxious. At least let's those of us who are conscientious get upset, about that. And we might be sweating. We might like worry about how are they going to perceive me now, or am I safe? Are they going to take me down? Like these are all the kinds of things that leaders worry about, reputation, all of this stuff. And the as you're talking about this, it makes so much sense when you said like it's the part of our brain that reacts the fastest, because you're in survival mode, right? Like the most important thing that this brain has started us out with is first protect ourselves from harm. And even though we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers anymore, it doesn't matter. We've manufactured ways to feel the same way in order to protect ourselves as humans. It just makes perfect sense that is the fastest to respond. And if that piece is hijacked, it's so much harder to respond cognitively. Like you can imagine like how you feel, like tunnel vision, hard to concentrate, hard to focus, can't decide, all of these things. So getting your amygdala back to like a stable place makes sense before you can use your frontal lobe to make the decision, right? All of that makes perfect sense, to focus on what's happening with your body in those situations.
And it can be especially for those of us who have developed to be like, I don't want to shame anyone. This isn't necessarily a judgment. I actually myself can relate to being overly reliant on cognitive thought, meaning making, like, and to believe myself rational when in fact I was really hijacked in my past. Like that's relevant. So it can be really hard work to learn the skill of slowing down and being with oneself and be able to notice like physiology's going haywire. What do we need to settle? And that ends up being deeply important work, so that those fast brain parts don't get so ramped up and so out of control so fast, and we're more in touch with our ability to connect.
Yeah. I would love to hear about kind of your own experiences when we come back from the ad break. But before we get to the ad break, which is in just a minute, I want to sort of highlight one other thing that you mentioned, which is it's burning resources. Tell us a little bit about like what is happening and why is that part important, that it's burning resources?
Yeah. So because it makes it, when we're working harder, we're pumping more cortisol into our bodies. Our heart rates are increasing, blood pressure goes up, respiration gets less deep. Like all of these physiological markers of stress deplete us. And that's not so much when it's happening, in over a 5-minute increment, but when we are spending our whole days in survival mode. I mean, if you look at like the ACEs pyramid, which takes you from like generational trauma through local context to family of origin and what that environment is like the next few rungs are what happens when that doesn't get interrupted. And they're pretty gnarly for like behavioral health and literal physical health. So rewiring those reactions, so to speak, obviously no actual wires involved, ends up being really important for our well-being.
100%. Yeah. When I was doing research with post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans, one of the things that we were looking at is how if you have long-term high-level cortisol constantly in your system, so like a constant stress response or trauma response and exposure, it does cause physiological changes, and it can produce metabolic changes and lead to, even diabetes, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory disorders, autoimmune disorders. All of that is connected. Every single
Yep.
one of these things are connected, mind, body, right?
Yeah.
So it's really so critical for us to recognize, and it's hard. It's hard. So when we come back from the ad break, let's talk a little bit more about your own journey, how you got to this place of understanding for yourself, and then eventually, how you help your own clients. So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Laura Phoenix. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you are here right now when we're live streaming, you can ask us questions and we could answer right back. We're on LinkedIn and at YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
If you don't have your health, what do you really have? It's time to feel good in your body and shift from struggle to ease. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Tripp, your host of Nourish the Soul, where we explore the sacred wisdom of your body while you sit back, relax, and go on a journey of self-discovery. Join me every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to awaken your heart, transform your well-being, and unlock a deeper understanding of yourself.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Laura Phoenix. And both of us, if you're listening later, have been bopping to the music.
We've been aggressively bopping.
Yeah, amusing ourselves here. All right. Well, okay, now it's hard to transition into this very serious next question I have after we've been bopping. But you did mention towards the end of the last section about being, hijacked in your past, right? And how this has, affected you as well. You shared very openly, and you do share very openly, being an abuse and trauma survivor, and how you do practice what you preach, and that this work has helped you as well. So I suspect in many ways it probably helps you be better attuned and understand your clients, have empathy. I'm wondering if you're willing to share a little bit about how this, trauma-informed work has helped you and how it's helped shape how you think about how you work with others.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine doing this work if I hadn't been through some kind of journey myself. It doesn't feel like I'd be such an effective partner in holding space and helping people learn. So yeah, and when I'm going to say I used to get hijacked a whole hell of a lot more frequently, but I'm also not going to sit here and tell you that it never happens now. I mean, this world around us is hella chaotic and hella stressful. And I just for like transparency and like showing up as a real human being, I'm going to freely admit that I spent the morning after election day, like pretty hijacked. The difference for me between then and now is that now I am able to not shame myself for it. Usually I'm able to not override my very active nervous system that has things to say to keep me safe and well. And I'm able to take more compassionate care of me. And that gives me the capacity to take better, more skillful care of the folks around me too.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the most important things that I've learned to do is connect with all the parts of myself and be able to hold them with a lot more tenderness than our culture encourages us to.
Wow, that is probably something we all wish that we could do better, right? And in certain cases, better than others. How did you get to that point? What does it take?
I think some of it is skillful modeling, and I think that happens in any good therapeutic relationship, whether it's with, talk therapist, counselor, somatic experiencing practitioner, I mean, yoga teacher, like friend. It doesn't even have to be a professional. But when we in our current, and especially in our early lives, have had the kind of modeling that we're supposed to marginalize parts of ourselves, that some parts of us are wrong and shameful and unacceptable. We tend to repeat that pattern. I know I did. And a lot of the folks I see still do that. And that's one of the things that's happening when we do this work of turning toward ourselves with somebody holding space, is start to notice the parts of us that aren't welcome, and the parts of us that are hard to look at, and hold those parts with more care.
And would you say that it requires unlearning, letting go, or doing something different, or replacing, all of the above?
Some combination of the above for sure, right? I think that a first really important step is noticing. When I tell this story sometimes, when I think back to one of my earliest somatic experiencing thingies, sessions, times when someone was holding space for me, I remember that I'd had a pretty stressful morning. I can remember the circumstances. It was like my car wouldn't start. It was, chaotic and stressful, but not like big problem. And that had stressed me out, and I had made my way and shown up anyway. And I can remember sitting across from someone who watched my body language. I can't remember what they asked me, but I remember really vividly being asked, like, what's your experience in this moment like? And inside it was like chaos. And having them reflect back to me that it kind of felt like I wasn't so sure the chair was going to hold me. And in a way that was true. Because when your experience of life has been that it doesn't support you well, that's in the physiology. And that was kind of an undercurrent that I hadn't necessarily looked very closely at until it was pointed out. But then seeing it, I knew something new about myself, and it wasn't just in the thinking, it was in the feeling into, and like what I had space to be with. And that's the kind of thing that I'm pretty accustomed to doing every day. Like who shows up and tells me a really uncomfortable, painful truth about what their life feels like for them today, and then dismisses it with, but it's okay, or who begins to tear up when they notice something that's happened, and then quickly bites their lip and pushes it down. So noticing is a really important first step. And then being able to expand our attention to also notice like what's happening that's supportive. There's that painful piece. There's our habitual reaction. There's kind of the well-worn rut of the way we've learned to be with ourselves. And then can we open and also notice like what's getting us through this moment? Sometimes it's the person sitting across from us. Sometimes sometimes if we're able to retrain ourselves to the very mundane action of like, can we take in the room and notice that that what's happening right now is okay enough.
Yeah.
And then it expands the possibility for being with ourselves more fully.
One thing that's coming up for me as you're describing this is, often in like talk therapy, we're asked, how do you feel? And there's a list of words we can choose from. Happy, sad, pain, and the part of that is really helpful is that some people can't even recognize their feelings. And that is the noticing, right? But sometimes you're still in your head when you describe the words, like, oh, that's a word, I feel mad, right? And so what you're describing here is like the literal sensation right now, which has a deeper meaning than the sort of label to the emotion.
Yeah. And sometimes for some people, it's a little easier to access. Not always, not for everyone, but right. Like I have to kind of think about it. If I've never had someone connect the dots for me, that this explosive feeling paired with jaw clenching and, arms getting tense is rage or anger. Right. Like that's a few cognitive steps that I might not be able to make. But if I'm sitting with someone who is doing those behaviors and I ask, like, can you feel your arms? They start connecting those dots a little faster oftentimes.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And, I think noticing is so critical because so many of us shut down when we're under high stress. And, I've worked with leaders who didn't realize they were shutting down and shutting out other people, or shutting down and shutting down other people in addition, in order to shut out the sort of like overwhelm of emotions and reactions. And if you do that as an employee, most of the time you have people around you, you have your manager, they're like, are you, checking in, are you okay, et cetera, et cetera. But if you do that in a leadership role, the power that you have in that role can be catastrophic to other people experiencing your shutdown, because it feels more threatening and intimidating to them for you to do that to them. And it can be a derailer, for your leadership trajectory. And so it has the weight of your words, but the weight of your actions has such a massive ripple effect in an organization and with your teams, that it's critical that people in leadership develop the skill to catch themselves, to notice super early, as quickly as possible, because they don't have the luxury of like spending a week thinking about it. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we're reaching an ad break. When we come back, I would love to talk through a little bit more about, what leaders can do when their own stuff is coming up, and how they can use the techniques that you talk about to start kind of getting back online or reconnecting with their bodies in order to be more effective. So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Laura Phoenix, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Laura Phoenix. It's kind of like a juxtaposition for us to be like listening to this fun, fast-paced music, bopping along, and then talking at a really deep level about painful and traumatic experiences. We'll just name it. We'll just embrace it. Okay, so talking about, leaders and leadership, and especially like I work with a lot of women in leadership, a lot of folks with additional marginalized identities, and there's a real challenge that I'm constantly thinking about how they need to show up, and they need to be fully engaged, and they're asked to be vulnerable, and they're asked to be open, and they're asked to be authentic, and they might have had a lot of heavy stuff that they're carrying around with them, and lots of messages about authenticity and what it means to be a leader, and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm curious just to hear what your thoughts are on how they can both sort of take care of themselves while they're in a position of trying to also take care of others in an organization and still find that balance.
Pardon me. Yeah, I think that especially women in our culture, and I think we talked about this before, that kind of in many ways, the more marginalized identity that you hold, the more you're expected to overfunction. And we were talking earlier about that high cost to the nervous system of functioning with high stress and or unresolved trauma and or current trauma, which may very well be the case. Like the more marginalized identities a leader holds, the more likely that we're still getting that incoming message from the culture that some parts of us are not acceptable. So it really feels like a double bind to me to be told, like, show up, be authentic, be vulnerable, and also not all parts of yourself are welcome here.
Yes.
Like, that just saying it is making me have a bunch of feelings about it.
Yes.
And I think that one of the most important things that someone who's in that position needs is care. And if a person who's on the receiving end of a bunch of crap cultural messaging and a high level of expectation doesn't yet have the capacity to bring that care to themselves, or doesn't have the kind of supportive team around them. And I don't necessarily mean work team, pardon me, but a stable enough relationship, like skilled enough friendship, some of those things that we hope to be able to rely on in our communities. I think that's when it's really important to enlist some kind of help, so that so that you're able to get the care you deserve. So that you're not so much at the mercy of all of the systems of harm that exist in this culture, and tremendous pressure in your role, like, and having to overfunction, especially if there's some unhealed trauma coming up. I think that help is really important.
Yeah. And, there's actually more and more research coming out that when you hold in and hold back how you feel, especially when you're angry, frustrated, with resentful, right, about the things that have been placed on you. There's some research that even that leads to some autoimmune conditions and inflammatory conditions, and especially higher rates in women, because they're holding back a whole lot more.
Right. It's that high cost of doing business again, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So now what does this have to do with yoga? Tell us about that.
Sure.
How does that connect? Tell me more.
So that's one of a couple of interventions I use. We mostly, like I haven't labeled it per se, but when I'm talking about sitting with people one-on-one, I'm generally talking about somatic experiencing work. And the yoga intervention I do is actually an evidence-based intervention for the treatment of complex trauma. If I was going to nerd out at length about it, I would tell you all about the super cool studies that the Atlanta VA did, comparing it against cognitive processing therapy as a control, which is notable since that is kind of a gold standard in evidence-based intervention. And also since we've tossed around how the cognitive parts of the brain are slower, and right, whole bunch of stuff there about the interest of comparing those two. But what I like to geek out about a lot is that the completion rate when they compared these two groups was higher for the yoga group, and also the symptom reduction for the yoga group occurred earlier, mid-intervention for the yoga group compared to 2 weeks post-intervention for no, I remember that right. I had to think about it for a second. 2 weeks post-intervention for the cognitive processing group. So those are a couple of really cool pieces of news about how effective that is. And one thing that can be really cool for some people, right? It's like a personal preference and where you're coming from sort of thing. But especially in the yoga intervention, it's a lot less about looking directly at what's going on and a lot more about reinforcing choice. There are a bunch of ways that if I was teaching a yoga class, I could hold the space, and a lot of things I could prioritize. Like, lots of listeners have probably been to a yoga class where the teacher might have set such priorities as like cool playlist. None of these are wrong, by the way. Like cool playlist, peak pose, strengthening apart, stretching apart. Like lots of the possibilities are endless. When I'm holding this space, the things that we are practicing are reinforcing choice. So every time I suggest a thing that my folks might do with their bodies, it's like, if you'd like to, you might do this thing or that thing. You have a choice. And interoception, which is just a fancy word for felt sense. You might do this thing that I'm suggesting, and if you try it, you might notice that something is happening in your shoulder. Do you also feel something happening through your side? So we're practicing doing some of those things that, frankly, trauma takes from us, exercising our agency and connecting with ourselves.
That is fascinating. So interesting. I know. We can.
I love
it's
it.
okay. It's okay, Laura. We can geek out. It's okay. I really want to geek out right now. Absolutely. Reinforcing choice makes a lot of sense. The interoception of, connecting with what's happening inside your body makes perfect sense. I don't want to get us off tangent too much, but like interoception is also something that is part of intervention for people with autism, especially people with more severe autism. They have more trouble with interoception. So it's applicable to so many people's needs, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
And not just people with trauma backgrounds, including the fact that I feel like I think you could speak to this a little bit more, that over time I feel like we've more and more disconnected to our bodies as we do so much online work. I don't know if you've had any thoughts on that, or what you're seeing in your own practice.
Yeah, so many thoughts and feelings. I think I just noticed it in my own day to day when I think about like over my own lifespan as kind of like am I like a middle-aged adult? I guess I'm a middle-aged adult. Good God. Right. So like as a child, if you were going to connect to someone, you might be more likely, for me in my lived experience, to be standing or sitting across from them, to be like doing a thing together, or maybe to be on the phone and have access to a person's voice. Whereas now, so much of our social interactions, like I actually talk about this with friends all the time, how many steps there are to actually get a connection to a person. Often there's like, you text the friend and check and see if they're available, and you might call them, you might get together with them. And it's like, yeah, like what's that practicing? And I'm not saying that we're wrong for living in the culture that we live in, and cooperating with its norms, because that's kind of how we have to get by. But it also really it diminishes some of the possibilities for close connection that we actually need as human animals to be well. I think I have like hypotheses that I don't have any data for about what these years coming out of pandemic stage have been like for people. But like I know in my own habits and norms, the sense of disconnection feels a bit more pronounced. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have noticed people craving getting back to connection. And I'm wondering, in the research that you did with like why the yoga intervention worked more quickly and reduced symptoms more quickly, is there any piece of that because it was in a group format and there was some connection, or more connection even with the instructor if it was one-on-one?
So, to my knowledge, because this wasn't my study, but one that was run through the Atlanta VA, and that's actually one other very interesting point about that study is that it was done. I'm trying to remember the exact dates, and I can't, because I'm notoriously bad at remembering numbers and dates personally. But the time frame was early lockdown phase of the pandemic.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, all the interventions went from being in person to being on Zoom, and it still worked.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I would love to hear what you make of that. We're reaching an ad break, so let's take the ad break first. And I would love to know, like, what do you make of, the research so far around, these kind of somatic interventions. And then, we'll bring it back to kind of how to conceptualize that for very busy leaders who lead crazy fast-paced lives and what they can do, right? So you're listening to The Hard Skills or watching it with me right now and Laura, and we will be right back in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Laura Phoenix. And Laura and I have been geeking out on the fascinating research that she found about how this one yoga intervention showed a lot of promise around, greater completion rates, which that part doesn't surprise me. It can be very difficult to stick with a protocol like cognitive processing therapy. Can be intense. And yoga in some ways feels more enveloping, I guess. And, especially when you describe like reinforcing choice and interoception, like I could imagine being able to stick to that a little bit longer. And then also like the reduction in symptoms is kind of amazing to me as well sooner. So now moving it back to just rooting it in what I'm seeing as sort of a new workplace pandemic, we can call it that, or epidemic, at least in this country. I see a lot of people who are getting burned out faster, stretched thin, exhausted. It's the post-COVID worn out, experience. And I see this with people in leadership too. They're exhausted too. They're stretched thin. Everybody's like wanting an out, but we don't all have an out. We don't all have that option. And so I'm just wondering, can somatic work be something that they can add to their toolbox to help them? And if so, in what way? Like, how do you imagine it could help?
Yeah, definitely. And I work with a lot of folks in high stress professions who are in leadership roles. In fact, some of, it's kind of interesting, like asking that around, like kind of immediately following us talking about how the intervention moved online. Some of the folks I see who fit those parameters in particular, like, look, how do I make it? If you'd asked me before the pandemic if I, a movement teacher and body worker, could move my profession online, I'd be like, nope. And I was wrong. Like, not only was I able to effectively move it online, just like our friends at the Atlanta VA did, but I've learned new skills in that time. I like learned and now help assist trainings for other trauma care professionals using touch skills for trauma recovery. Touch skills. Like, it's not the same. It's not literal, like hand to body touch, but the way that we make contact, even over this medium of seeing and feeling each other, when we can do that, like it also makes a difference. I see a number of the busiest professionals I see on Zoom, either because they are too far away to make it to me, and or because their schedules are so demanding that's how it works. And it does still work.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It's real
So
cool.
yeah, it's super cool. What do you think is happening for like, what are the sort of physiological changes that create change in your understanding of it?
Access to felt sense of safety. Whether or not I'm literally in a room with a person, that's like the bottom line most important thing that I'm looking to reinforce, whether I'm using touch work in person or online, whether I'm holding a space for a group yoga practice, or whether I'm sitting with a person, we might be like processing something, using SE. It's really important for a nervous system that tends to loop into that activated state to give it a like help it learn an out, right? Does the thing happen and then my heart rate races, my breathing gets shallow, my muscles get clenchy, and then like there's the thing that always happens. And then there's, can we hold that? Can we notice that? And can we also find enough access to feel that something else is also happening, whether, again, that's like the mundane thing of, oh, in this room, things are kind of okay. Or, we're showing up to a yoga class and like, okay, you've got the thing whirring away in the background, whatever the stressor is. And then we move our bodies, we make some choices, and we learn over time that we have that access to take that high activation down to a, hum or whatever it is. It's not to get rid of it. We're not trying to put some parts of ourselves in a closet. We're trying to hold them and also be able to notice what is okay. And some nervous systems need some help with that. I know mine did.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that is exactly what we're all seeking, is safety, right now, security and safety. That's pretty powerful. So if we were to now pull it all together, right? How do you see these concepts that are seemingly so quote unquote simple? I mean, it's not really that simple, but seemingly could potentially make such an impact to create a more human-centered world. That's where kind of we started. How do you make that connection? Where is that?
I think that the more connected we are to ourselves, the better we can connect in our intimate relationships, in our friendships, in our communities, in our workplaces. And if we're fragmented, because the thing we always did was turn away, shut down, yell at someone, there's an endless array of ways that people cope with having more stress than they can navigate skillfully, right? And the more we have access to safety in ourselves, the more we can hold the parts of ourselves that might be a little at war with tenderness and care and compassion. Like the more that we can give ourselves care, the more we can extend that care and mirror that care around us. Like the more, the kind of the deeper the well we're drawing from. And this world needs.
Wow. Oh, wow. That is powerful. That's powerful. All right. If you're dying to know more and learn more from Laura. Laura, tell us where they can find you. How can
Sure.
they learn more?
My website is www.warriorposeyoga.com. It's actually pretty easy to show up for group yoga classes. You can literally click through links there. So if that's immediately interesting, you can click group yoga, you can click get yoga, and that can happen. I've also got some free resources there. If you scroll down, there are actually abbreviated classes available. And there's a free consult button where if somebody's listening and they're really like, yeah, I have my own questions about how I can do this, that's a possibility. So yeah, free resources, yoga classes, and the possibility to connect and ask your own questions are all available on my website.
Love it. Love it. So easily accessible for such powerful impact. So, audience, what did you take away? And more importantly, what is one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Laura? Share it with us on LinkedIn and share it with talkradio.nyc on LinkedIn. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon podcasts, all over the place. Help increase our visibility, reach, and impact in the messages that you're hearing from the people on the show by leaving a review. And just wanted to say how grateful I am for what you do, Laura. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I'm Dr. Mira Branco, the host of the Hard Skills Show. And Laura, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day, wherever you're tuning in from. Bye, everybody.